Marisa Daly is an experienced HR consultant, and she's recently, in the last couple of months, joined talent prospecting. Um, and today we're just going to get to know each other a little bit better. And uh, yeah, so Marisa, to begin, tell me a little bit about your background in HR, why you joined HR maybe, or some of your previous work experience.
Thanks, Conall. So I have about over 25 years of experience in HR, working for various multinational organizations across multiple industries, from nonprofits all the way to telecommunications. My roles have mostly focused on the Africa region, overseeing multiple markets in the Africa region and working with international organizations with a large footprint in Africa. I got into HR a little bit just actually by mistake, well, not by mistake, I just kind of fell into it. I was working in the nonprofit sector as part of the emergency relief response to the Rwanda genocide in the early 90s, and we were doing relief work into Rwanda and Burundi, and they needed an HR person to do recruitment. Well, they needed someone to do recruitment, and I stuck my hand up because I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to do, and I haven't looked back since. So I think recruiting and attracting the best talent has always been a passion of mine. And that's kind of how I got into it, because I thought, well, that will be interesting to try to find the best people to get to go into Rwanda and do food aid delivery and relief response work. So it's always been the area of HR that I like the most, is around talent and talent management. And I think, because I think that it's such a unique capability that a company can use to differentiate itself from everyone else, is really the type of skill that you can attract and retain in the long term.
And so you from your initial foray into recruitment, kind of being thrust into it, as you said, how did your career develop from there, and how did your role sort of change and from going from that recruitment side into, as you said, larger, very large companies operating in Africa?
Yeah. So initially was doing a lot of recruitment, and recruitment doesn't just stand on its own. There's onboarding, there's a whole lot of stuff, and so I just gradually started taking on more, because I was, I think, doing a good job of finding people in the shortest periods of time. I was given more and more responsibilities, and with that then came I was then responsible for an entire function, HR function within South Africa. So I just kind of took on more work, because I think that I was pretty successful in doing, the job. And so I took on more work and started working for larger organizations. I eventually left the nonprofit sector and moved into larger organizations in, the IT space, the engineering and construction space. And I think I've always been pretty confident, I think, about the HR space and managing people and the relationships, and being successful in addressing the challenges that businesses have from an HR perspective, and really being able to speak to the business, and not just wearing your HR hat, because sometimes if you only wear your HR hat and speak too much in HR lingo, you lose the business. So you have to actually be able to bridge that, that conversation between what does the business need and what can HR bring. So really, I think when I got into HR in the early 90s or in the mid 90s, there was also a lot of discussion, and it was very trendy to read Dave Ulrich's HR Champions, which spoke about bringing HR from the back room to the boardroom. So people all of a sudden started really sitting up and listening to what HR had to say. And I always felt very comfortable in speaking to the business around, these are your challenges. or these are what I see our challenges are and how we can fix it. And so grew from that, primarily in South African based companies. But because I speak two other languages that are quite commonly spoken in Africa, French and Portuguese, I then started getting assignments to work with Portuguese and French speaking countries in the HR space. And from there, I then, started actually overseeing those markets.
And as you developed as a professional from the 90s, and as your sort of link and working relationship with C-level executives grew, did you see a change in how companies and leadership viewed their people? And was there an evolution of thinking on the highest level of companies in how they viewed and managed their people between the 90s, the mid 90s, and now?
Definitely. So very interestingly, the non-profit sector, which is where I started with World Vision, which is a multinational non-profit, they were actually the ones who were very clued into talent management in the early 90s when I started, because they can't afford to pay the top salary. So they can never be market leaders in compensation. So we really had to find other ways of attracting the best talent. And it was mostly around purpose-driven, the purpose-driven type of opportunity for people, and perhaps, some good benefits and, a salary, but never a market leader. So we spent a lot of time in working groups and global working groups figuring out how do we attract and retain the best talent when you can't pay the top salaries, when you can't be the market leader. So I learned a lot in the nonprofit sector. Interestingly, when I moved from nonprofit at the time into the IT sector, which was in the early 2000s and the whole, dot-com bubble burst and all that, they were not focused on talent management and attracting and retaining the best talent. It was simply, let's just get people in to do this work and just find people. That was it. But gradually that started changing into the late 90s, early 2000s, because a lot of companies went bust at the time. A lot of consolidation of companies in that space, and with that, people started thinking, okay, do we need as many people? How do, with the consolidation and acquisition and merging of companies, how do we retain the best people, get rid of the dead wood, etc. So it started changing from just get the bums on the seats, which was kind of very, very typical, to, all right, how do we start getting the best people? Because actually, there has been the dot-com, the bubble burst, things started getting really, really difficult. And so they had to be more intentional about how to spend their money. So there was definitely a change into the early 2000s. And then we had a big, the other thing that happened was, with the stock market crash in 2008. So prior to that, there was a huge demand for commodities and huge demand in the mining sector for new projects, new builds, huge. And so there was a lot of demand for key skills, in engineering and other skills. And you could see again, okay, how do we attract and retain our best talent? And there you had to pay top dollar. So if you're paying top dollar, you needed to make sure you were getting the best people. Then so it's very cyclical. Then we had the market crash in 2008. And then you could just find people, anywhere. But the companies that really, I think, stood the test of time were those that didn't panic and just lay off all their people. So a lot of companies, and I was in one of them that did this, we actually, because we had spent so much time trying to attract and retain our best people, what we actually did is people took voluntary pay cuts to keep their jobs and forfeited, bonuses so that we could ride the storm and come out on the other side and still keep our best people.
That's such a cool approach. And because it's one, it's giving people the autonomy and the opportunity. You're saying, we've set up this relationship, we're now working together, we know how valuable you are, but if we need to ride out this period and the one option is layoffs, the other option is everyone takes a hit for a certain amount of time. So I think giving people the choice there was really cool.
Yeah.
And so from there, sort of what why did you decide to join talent prospecting? What attracted you to positive peer recognition as a methodology as opposed to the other ones that are currently on the market?
Sure. So I've done a lot around talent management in recent years. It is becoming a hugely strategic priority in organizations, around attraction, which has obviously been always a key driver, just get the best talent in the shortest period of time. But now people are saying, okay, we need more than that. We need to actually retain them. We need to identify internally who are our best people. So I've always done a lot of work around that. And what I really found when doing work with the business around talent management is that a lot of time people don't want to talk about it because it feels too overwhelming. It just feels like it's a very big thing that people can't get their hands around. Managers are busy, so it's like, well, we're just going to carry on. So what I found really helped is to have some sort of parameters or a framework that kind of gives people the safety of, okay, this thing, talent management isn't this like long, how long is a piece of string kind of thing, but this is how we're going to do it. We're going to break it down into small pieces, and we're going to go on this journey, so to speak, of talent management, and this is what we're going to do in terms of priorities. So what was cool about that is that people in the business were able to understand it. So, instead of when you talk about talent management and let's say succession planning, if you tell people you need a succession plan for your entire organization in one go, they just shut down. It's too much, unless you only have 10 people, it's just too much to think about with everything else. So if you break it down and say, okay, let's focus then, on your critical roles and your key talent that is in the, should be in those critical roles, then people say, okay, I can do this. What I really liked about talent prospecting is, and how it's kind of a bit different from other stuff that I've used, is that it really brings that element of democracy. It democratizes talent management. And I just can't believe that we actually have never thought of asking people what they think about their peers in a positive way. So we do ask them, for 360-degree feedback, and people get very nervous about doing 360-degree, particularly in organizations that don't have that maturity to do it, because it's usually like, I have an axe to grind, and so I'm going to take this opportunity to do that. And very often that negative feedback is not given to people, and so there's no use, there's no value to it, and more people are moving away from 360. So what I like about positive peer recognition is that you are getting feedback from colleagues and peers who work with the person on a daily basis, on a project, etc. And it democratizes it in two ways. The first way is that you are getting feedback from those people. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that it allows, the person to also get that feedback from other people that are working with them. And so if there's someone who is very good at blowing their own horn, you will very quickly see, the people have spoken, and what that person is saying is not congruent with what others are saying. So it's very much like people are voting with their feet around talent management. So I really, really like that. And I just can't believe that we've never done it, really.
Yeah, I that's as I sort of developed the idea, and then created the positive peer recognition review, the first 3 months were spent proving that it doesn't already exist, because the shock that companies would never think of, well, who are our best people? Well, let's ask everybody who works with them day in, day out. That's not a concept that has really ever occurred to companies in a major way, apart from, as you
No,
said, in elements of the 360 review. But again, there's so many bias issues with that the likes of Microsoft and larger companies are drifting away from it now because it is a bit archaic and old fashioned. But what I found really, really strange was, well, what I genuinely wanted to change was that advancement in companies, getting recognized for your good work, or getting the opportunity to be promoted and rise, is at least as dependent on people's perception of their ability as it is on their ability. And a lot of this is just because people have not thought through the old framework of how people are recognized. And like a big example of this would just be an internal interview. So an internal interview, you're going to be the hiring manager will be asking you questions. So you're basically testing people's confidence and ability to answer questions on the spot, and in a short-term goal oriented way, to find a manager who, the main traits of your manager, you want long-term goal orientation. You want them to be incredibly good at dealing with problems. You want them to be incredibly well respected by their peers. And you want them to be able to be introspective and think things through and make correct decisions with the company in mind and with their colleagues in mind. So leading with empathy and sort of at times even circumspection. And the internal interview tests for none of this. It basically tests for it can't mitigate against manipulation. It can't mitigate against arrogance. It can't mitigate against hiring manager bias. Um, so I just I thought it was crazy that how people perform in, an interview or in two interviews is taken into account more than their built relationship with the people they work with maybe every day for 5 years. So not to take that feedback on board and not to give that little bit of democratization to who should advance or who should be given opportunities, or maybe just, Marissa, who should be seen. We can't just think of it in a linear way, because sometimes people just don't want to be promoted, or it's not in their wheelhouse, or they understand that their skills don't lie in people management. But still, if they're recognized above all their other colleagues by the people they work with day in, day out, there then, the companies have to retain to maintain the culture.
yeah,
Um,
definitely. And some people are just so good at, shameless self-promotion on a consistent basis. And then what you find is they just get rapidly promoted within the organization, and that's not sustainable either, because um, their expectations outgrow the number of positions that are available for potential promotion. And what you very often find is that they leave. So your stars, I don't like that word at all, but let's say your stars very often are not retained in the long term. Whereas you're better off, looking at your hidden gems who are just quietly plugging away day in, day out. They might have some hidden talents, which are actually the best talents to uncover, because there's also an element of job enrichment for that person. So even if you're not able to promote, you can enrich their job by uncovering something that they are good at that you could use on another project, as an example.
yeah, 100%. And sometimes it's enough to just say, we see you. Like, we see the incredible work you're doing, how you keep all the team together, the amount of work you do in the background, and especially in remote environments. I think asking managers to objectively, for example, rate their 10 or 15 remote employees, I think that's why talent management scares managers, because it's genuinely scary. It's very difficult for them to see, because their role isn't, I hope, um, some sort of like 1980s all-seeing eye of Sauron kind of thing. That they really genuinely don't know what everybody's doing all the time, and nor should they if you're in a company that trusts their employees and has an autonomous sort of working culture. And then you're asking managers to choose between to kind of go on a guess and go on a vibes of who they believe might be the best potential employee, or without ever taking into account the consensus recommendations of everybody else on the team. Because again, like positive peer recognition isn't a panacea. It's just another data point
Yeah,
that has
data
to be
point.
considered.
Agreed.
Um,
Agreed.
so, Marissa, before we finish, what would you like to see in terms of how companies relate to their employees going forward from, say, a HR perspective or from a talent management perspective?
Wow, that's a very interesting question. I think that the relationship is being redefined in some way. So normally it's quite a transactional relationship, employer-employee relationship. You get hired for a job, you go in every day, you do your work, you get paid, carry on. What I think more and more people are wanting, and the companies who do this well are doing it, in my perspective, is that there's more of a boots on the ground, or there's more of a presence on the floor of managers and HR, and really understanding the talents that we have. So, it's not a literal thing, because obviously, as you said, a lot of people are working remotely, etc. But it's bringing that connection, that relationship to the employer-employee relationship. It's that relationship of I know who my people are, I understand them, I'm aware of what their key strengths and opportunities for development. And it's actually, as we talk about it, it seems like really straightforward. Like, yes, it sounds obvious, but it's so few companies do that, actually. So what I would really like to see, and it is changing, is that there's just more of a presence in that employee-employer relationship, and more of a democratization in that your peers will be able to inform also decisions about your career development, as you will as well. And that's what I think is really, really cool about positive peer recognition.
I think it's I think it's I think it's something we can definitely achieve, because the old top-down recognition style, the sort of Henry Ford 1920s way of having a company is everybody's a cog, and then recognition is just goes from one management tier to another. That just doesn't hold water anymore because, well, there's loads of reasons. Number one, people are way more qualified. Number two, people are way more sort of free in and interchangeable, and they have more capability to change jobs fast. They can, like, a couple of years ago you chose a career and you stayed in it forever, hopefully in the same employer forever. Now people understand their value much more, and people can upskill, they can retrain, all all online, and they can easily switch from one employer to another every couple of years. And that used to be seen as a massively negative aspect, but I I I genuinely see it as a positive for people. And one thing that really upsets me, Marissa, is when companies speak, they say things like there's no more loyalty. But I think staff on a very high level have been taught that loyalty is a bad idea. And especially in the last 3 years, they've been trained out of loyalty because if you're an employee on a team and you do the vast majority of the work, you're working remotely, you're basically doing a manager's job, and but the manager doesn't see you or recognize you, you're then in a bad relationship where you're not being valued and seen. And if that happens over time, it's not disloyalty to leave, it's actually common sense. Because same with any other relationship, if you're not being valued and understood and seen over time, it's definitely the best idea to get out of it and to find another employer or another person who will value you. And I think employees have been taught that, but I definitely think companies can redress that balance by putting intentional, as you said earlier, methods in place to see their staff, to understand who is doing the most work, who is providing the most positive working environment for their colleagues. And I think I'm so excited about working for you for the next two or number of years to make this a reality in as many companies as we possibly can.
Yeah, and also it's almost like just taking it back to the basics, because I feel like there's so much stuff out there around, just a lot of programs around employment equity or affirmative action or diversity, equity, and inclusion, or, it's just all the stuff in the workplace. But people aren't talking to each other, or people aren't giving, like the proper feedback that should be given. So you almost feel like you launch a program and you think then the work is done. You might have a quick little meeting, have a few conversations, and then you carry on. Whereas what I think positive peer recognition enables is conversation, and it enables even the frequency of the conversation to happen, because you could literally do this on a quarterly basis if you wanted. And then with that information, you're able to create the conversation in a positive way, to get that feedback, to start the discussion, to, really. And so it's all about that connection that I don't feel is happening with all these big overarching programs that corporates are launching.
Yes. It's like, to put it in a sentence, if you want to know who your best people are, ask them. And that's something that's been lost in the myriad different psychometric tests and 360 reviews. Um, and one thing I'm genuinely worried about, Marisa, is that a lot of the new HR companies who have kind of launching at the same time we are AI based. And I have no problem whatsoever with AI as an idea, and I think it could be a tool that could be wonderful, but it's it's taking the it's making a fairly simple relationship even more complex. And we're going to have the mappings of interactions between people that the AI will generate to give you a sort of grid of who are the people that people are talking to most, rather than just asking their colleagues in a very, very simple
Just
format.
ask. Yeah, just ask. It's like, I kind of, it's, I relate it to, when you're online and logging into some system and you have to prove that you're not a robot. So you have to, like, identify. It's just like the most ridiculous thing ever. It's like you're human and now you have to prove that you're not a robot by, identifying all the bicycles in the grid or kind of thing. It's like, well, can we just, yes, AI and systems have a place and will help with work, but do not throw out the basic human interaction element of it and the feedback.
Yes. And the just on those AI systems, how reCAPTCHA knows that you're not a robot is because your mouse stroke will make errors. Robots don't. And I think that's a pretty good analogy, because if we lean more into, or like if we lean into relying on AI to make decisions about our people, um, what happens if there's an error with the AI? Who is then responsible? Because you can't hold an AI system responsible in the same way you can hold a person responsible. And the other side of that is you are then pandering to an AI in how you work if you want to rise to the top. And what we want to do is simplify it. You're not pandering to your boss. to any extent. You're not pandering to an AI or a system or trying to work in a certain way to like get noticed by an algorithm. What you're doing is you're being a great employee and you're being a great teammate, and you will be seen and measured on both on merit. And I think that's it's kind of the antithesis of AI, if you will, and the antithesis of sort of this massively data-driven approach that's come into HR. And like as you mentioned earlier, the more data and complexity you layer on, the more terrifying it gets for, say, managers on the ground. Because with so much data, have you seen any evidence that companies understand their employees better, or that employees feel more understood by their companies?
Not at all. And people don't even look at half of those reports. They only look at them when it's time to submit an annual report on something, or if your performance bonus is based on it, which is kind of driving all the wrong behaviors. How much more positive is it to find out who the most helpful people are on your team, or who are the best people at solving a really complex problem and helping others solve it, and just getting it down to the basics. Because I can tell you, like, your 9-box grids, your other metrics or data that gets reported on quarterly basis, let's say, or half year, no one looks at it until it's time to pull the report.
Yeah. And it's like, we do say spend time in English for a reason, because time is a resource and it's valuable. And the amount of time it's spent getting this data, collecting it, and say the 360 review system and all the others combined, that's an extraordinary amount of time, not even looking at the monetary side of it, just looking at the time and effort every employee has to put in to engage in this. And then the value that comes out of it on the other side, if it's metaphorically locked away in a closet for the rest of the year,
Yeah,
it's a little
it's
bit,
not.
it's data for data's sake,
Yeah, it's
as
not
opposed
something
to
that you
data to
can
make change.
use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, how cool would it be, like, if you ran, a positive peer recognition questionnaire on a quarterly basis, let's say? You could still use that for recognition of people, informal recognition, or, recognition in front of your team is the best recognition, I think. So you could still use that for highlighting the employee of the quarter, on a complex project, or, oh, by the way, the person sitting on their own working away at this project in Spain is actually been, nominated. All of their peers think they're really, really cool. So you can still use it for that, but it's just so much more meaningful. Because I really think that recency and frequency are really, really important when giving feedback.
I think you said like that was such a good analogy of the person sitting in Spain, because they're inherently invisible to maybe their boss, certainly their boss's boss, and certainly upper level management. They're a number in Spain. Now they don't become a number when everybody who works with them gives the feedback that this person is incredible. Then we shine a little spotlight on that person, and then the company says, okay, we might have somebody here that's worth building around, or that's worth building up. Um, but another sort of element of that, um, Marisa, just before we finish up, um, bear with me as I form a question.
No problem.
Um, no, I've lost it. I've lost it. You really put your finger on something, and when I think of it,
Okay, no problem. I mean, the other thing which is kind of cool with positive peer recognition is that often you do have senior leaders asking, like, we want to see fresh talent. We see the same names on the succession planning list. We see the same names across all the markets coming up again and again, and you actually can't plug the same person into 5 different roles. We've got a problem here. So bring us different names, bring us fresh names. And, like, people are stuck because how do you find those people? To your point, managers don't know everyone. They haven't taken the time to properly assess their people because of time constraints, etc. So positive peer recognition can also help with that, bring up fresh names for succession planning lists and talent management.
Yeah, because it's a resource that the company does not take advantage of is the opinions of all the people who work together all of the time. And that is a black hole of information the companies do not delve into. And it's a treasure trove because nobody really knows you as well as everyone who works with you, day in, day out. They know what type of employee you are. They know what it's like to bring a problem to you. They know how you communicate with others. And this is something you can't get with self-report, for example, in a 360 review, because there's no way of finding out if that self-report is number one, you could just be delusional. You could just believe that you're an incredible employee, but such a better marker, Marisa, is you're an incredible employee in the eyes of everyone you work with. That's a real data point. I'm an incredible employee personally. Okay, maybe I am, and maybe it's a really good analysis of how good I am. But if everyone else I work with for the last 5 years really values me very highly, that's a really good data point. And the point I wanted to bring up earlier um was to do with introversion and extroversion. And you were mentioning how when you want to bring new names, the same people always get noticed. And like if, say, 5 people work on a project, when it comes to the being noticed at the end of that project or maybe a presentation, the extrovert stands out even if they've done none of the work because they've then entered their comfort zone, which is self-promoting in front of people, speaking in front of people, an area where they're most comfortable. And quite often, there's a more introverted person sitting in the background who did all of the meaningful work and managed and ran the project, and they're simply nodding their heads because suddenly, in a one-off scenario, they're not in their comfort zone anymore. And that one-off scenario happens to be the most visible point of that project, which is pretty sad, but something that we can now fix.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Marisa, thank you so much. We better hold it there.
Thanks, Conall.
Um, I really appreciate it, and yeah,
This was really good.
looking forward to working with you over the next couple of years.
Yes, me too. This was really good. Thanks.
Thanks, Marissa. See you soon.
Okay.